Welcome everybody. We're also learning tonight Le'ilu Nishmat Sarah Bat Mordechai, and as well for Le'ilu Nishmat for Avraham ben Chaim Yehuda and Yecheskel ben Avraham. There was actually also a Refuah Shlema to Tzvi Yosef ben Esther. And obviously, like Michael mentioned earlier, for the entire class, so whoever needs a Refuah should have a speedy recovery. Okay, so tonight we're going to be dealing with a topic that's apropos now, but generally it's apropos throughout a period, throughout the person's life, depending on the life. The idea is when you're dealing with difficulties in life, the way that you deal with those difficulties, it can either make you or break you, and it depends on how you deal with it. So the discussion tonight, Be'ezrat Hashem, is going to be a discussion on, focusing on the loss of life, but it could really be applied to any loss. It could be applied to panasah, it could be applied, to marriage or single or getting gay. With all problems in itself could be applied to it, but the focus is going to be on the loss of life. When during this period of time, many people are in a period of mourning. And I was speaking to a friend of mine, and he was saying, like, this is not just regular people that are passing away during this time. These are like huge righteous people. They have, and when you go and you learn about them and you hear about them and you speak about them, I don't know to what extent all the, goes on the news, but there's a lot that doesn't go on the, the news in the Jewish news world, that you have a lot of people that did so much good for the Jewish nation, either big rabbis or big Baalei Chesed, giving tremendous amount of money to charity, starting organizations. And it's crazy how the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death, is like picking out all the good ones. And this is a question that people often ask, is why does God take the good ones? There's so many other people that they could have gone, and not, God forbid, I'm not saying that this one is more worthy than that, but when you look at the whole picture, and you look at somebody so amazing, and you look at somebody else, and be like, how is it that God took this one and not somebody else, for that matter? The other thing that we want to discuss tonight is, how does the Torah deal with death? What is the Torah view of death? Additionally, there's another two topics that I want to squeeze in for tonight, and that is, what about the family and the friends that go through this hardship? Many of them ask, why do I have to go through these tests and difficulties? I have friends that, Baruch Hashem, that didn't have to go through these tests and difficulties. So why is it that I have to? And finally, the final part is the negligence aspect of it. And this is an aspect that I want to start with, and that is, when you're dealing with these situations, because this situation is a very extreme situation, people always think like, okay, what about if maybe he wouldn't have gone to this Purim party, then nothing would have happened. If he wouldn't have gone to synagogue, then this wouldn't have happened. If he would have gone to a different hospital, maybe he wouldn't have died. If he would have gone to the hospital, maybe he wouldn't. There's so many what ifs, and people often beat themselves up. And this could be a part of, like, maybe I was negligent in the aspect of, what I shouldn't have done. So I want to share with you something from the Kal of a Rebbe. The Kal of a Rebbe goes and says like this. He says that everything is preordained by heavenly decree. Yes, we do have free will, and we could bear some guilt for negligence that can cause a death, but, and those people, if they cause a death through negligence, they unfortunately will be judged for that. But despite our negligence, the death of this person was predestined from heaven. It has nothing to do, and if not for this negligence, it would have occurred, or this person would have died in a different manner. And many times, people are saying, okay, it's coronavirus that killed this person. Coronavirus was the method that this person passed away. But if not for coronavirus, it was this person's time, and it would have been something else. And it's very difficult when we go and when we bear difficulties that we really shouldn't be bearing on ourselves. In 1920s, there was a famous incident, unfortunately, that happened in Israel. And what happened was, to give you a little bit of a precursor on this particular situation, in the early 1920s, the yeshivas in Jerusalem were financially going through difficult times. So the rabbis went and decided they're going to send a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Balk to go and try to, he was a very dynamic speaker, to try to raise funds for the yeshivas in Jerusalem. So he goes and he travels from place to place, gives his speeches, very dynamic, very inspirational, and then people go and donate to the institutions. One time he was in Chicago, and in Chicago he delivered this powerful, inspiring speech, and one person came up to him afterwards by the name of Yerachmiel Wexler. And this Mr. Wexler was very moved by this rabbi's speech, and he decided that he was contemplating he was going to move to Israel to open up a business so he could support the Jewish people of Jerusalem and of the area. So Yerachmiel went and he traveled to Israel. This is in the early 1920s. He traveled to Israel with his son, Yecheskel. And they went, and the first stop was in the famous Hebron Yeshiva, this yeshiva that was of a high-level learning. And they saw there many Americans that are sitting there and they're learning over there, and they were so inspired. Yerachmiel Wexler was so inspired. He decided that his son Yecheskel should remain over there in the yeshiva to go and learn. Now, during the winter, and he was there during the winter of 1928 to 1929. 6 months after he arrived in the yeshiva, the local Arabs perpetrated this deathly massacre of the Jewish people in Hebron. And in there, 67 Jewish souls were taken. And Yecheskel Wexler was one of the victims. And when the family heard the news, they were so broken. They were so, they couldn't even see their son. It was so far away. During that time, the air travel wasn't like there is today. There wasn't any air travel. So they went, and the family sat shiva in Chicago. The next, some time goes by, and the yeshivas in Israel, they needed some more financial support. So Rabbi Balk was again going to go to America to go and fundraise. And he said, fine, he'll go, but on one condition, he cannot go to Chicago. He said he went and he was indirectly caused his son, this famous, Yerachmiel Wexler, his son, to go to Israel. And because of that, his son died. He said, I can't see this person in his eyes and look at him because I caused his son to go to Israel. And because of that, his son is not here anymore. So they said, fine. They planned out his itinerary, and he wasn't going to go to Chicago. But God has a way of working things out. And when Rabbi Balk was in New York, he happened to meet this Mr. Wexler. And Mr. Wexler went and extended an enthusiastic greeting to him. And he says, Rabbi, he says, I was looking so forward to seeing you. And I was wondering, how come you're not coming to Chicago? And the rabbi, he said, listen, I specifically asked not to go to Chicago. So he said, Mr. Wexler said, why? Why not? And he said, I indirectly caused, you to lose your son. And I feel terrible. How could I face you? And Mr. Wexler was like, what? Lose my son? He's like, you gave me my son. 20 years ago, when he was born, his soul was destined to remain in the world for 20 years. This is what the father is telling the rabbi. The father goes and says this was his time to go. And he would have left the world regardless of where he was. But thanks to you, he spent 6 months studying in the Hebron Yeshiva. And I'm confident now that he has a share in the world to come. And many times, people blame themselves. They blame the corona, blame whatever it is that they do. But we have to realize when the time comes for a person to leave this world, the time comes and the person leaves. Regardless of how it went and how it came and what was the methods that came about this. Now, there's something very interesting that the Rashi brings down in the beginning of Parashat Chukat, which speaks about the purification process with dealing with the impurities of death. And over there, what Rashi says over there, what the Chazal teach us, is that a person has no permission to question when God takes someone from this world. Meaning that the decree comes from heaven. And because of the decree comes from heaven, we don't have no permission to go and question this. And the Ramban, Nachmanides, goes on this pasuk, and he goes and he comments, and he says, we're all God's children. He loves us more than a father could love his child. And even death itself is ultimately for the good. To the extent of this, that even the deceased themselves, even for the person that passed away, there's no reason to be pained. Why? Because the main characteristic of a human being is his internal soul, is his neshama. And that soul continues to live in a spiritual life. And for this very reason that we have there's parameters in the Jewish law on how we deal with mourning. There's pasuk in Devarim, chapter 14, verse 1, that says, Lo tisgodedu v'lo tisimu ka'acha ben einechem lamet. A person is not supposed to cut himself, he's not supposed to make himself any baldness between your eyes for the dead, meaning that in the pagan rituals, they used to mourn excessively with self-mutilation when someone passed away. But this is not appropriate to do that in the Jewish understanding. Why? Because the person is not dead. The person moved from one location to another location. And yes, it's appropriate to cry, and yes, it's appropriate to mourn. It's like a little child is going and being separated from his parents, and they're going to a faraway journey. So yes, it's appropriate to cry. But ultimately, the separation at death is never, never an eternal separation. As we all know, the final, what is the word I'm looking for? Coming together with all the family and the friends, the people that are lost. That's where with Tchiat HaMetim, the resurrection of the dead, we will we rejoin together with those that we lost. The Rabbi Aaron of Belz goes, and he lived through the Holocaust. And when he was in the Holocaust, he lost his entire family, and he lost all his children. And he arrived in Israel at February 3rd, 1944, after losing everything. And that Shabbat was Shabbat Shira. And its beginning, how does it begins? Az Yashir Moshe Uvnei Israel. Then the Jewish nation will go and sing, and Moshe Rabbeinu will sing. It speaks as then. And Rashi comments the name of the Medrash and also speaks about it in the Gemara that says that this is a hint that there's going to be, from the Torah, that there's resurrection of the dead. But says that, the Rabbi goes and explains something like an amazing chidush. He goes, and you see, the Torah tells us that when the Jewish nation went and they left Egypt, they left chamushim. What is chamushim? The simple meaning of it is that they left armed. They were armed. But there's an additional meaning of chamushim. Chamushim is like chamesh, which means a fifth. Chamushim, a fifth. Meaning that only 1/5, only 20% of the Jewish nation left Egypt. 80% did not leave Egypt. They stayed there. They died during the plague of darkness. Now, when you think about this, think about something unbelievable. That means that every Jew had many relatives that perished before the exodus of Egypt. So it must have been very difficult to go, and after the Jewish people left Egypt, they sang a song, Az Yashir Moshe Uvnei Israel. They sang Shirah to God. How could they go and sing Shirah? They just lost so many family members, so many friends, so many close relatives. How did the Jewish people go and sing? How? The Midrash goes and tells us they had tremendous amount of faith. They were able to sing despite the suffering, despite the deaths that they had. They were able to go and sing praises to God. And you think about it, the first Passover in Egypt, on one side you had the Egyptians who were crying, tremendously because of the pain of the deaths of their firstborn. But on the other side you had the Jewish nation who were singing, they were happy in their homes. But you have both lost people, families in their house. But you have one of them that they couldn't deal, and another one they were able to give praise and thanksgiving to God. Look at the difference between a Jew and a non-Jew. Now, even though you had the Jewish nation, 80% of them passed away, says the Bnei Yissaschar that this is, according to Kabbalah, this was very important, and this was a tikkun for these souls. Because we know in Yeshaya, in Isaiah, chapter 27, verse 13, it says, V'haya bayom ahu itaka b'shofar gadol. It says, in that day, when Mashiach comes, there's going to be a great shofar blowing. Uvau avdim be'eretz Ashur v'anidachim be'eretz Mitzrayim v'ishtachu l'Hashem b'har HaKodesh b'Yerushalayim. And what is it this pasuk is telling us? This pasuk is telling us in the resurrection of the dead, there will come a time where those that were cast away in the land of Egypt, those that passed away, they're going to come back. Says the Bnei Yissaschar, this was a tikkun for them. This was all, even though the people died during that time, even that was for the best. We don't always see that. We don't always understand that. But ultimately, we see that there is a bigger picture to life than we're privy to see to. And even though we could go and we could understand this, people often go and ask, yeah, okay, so we understand this concept, but why do I have to go through these difficulties? Like I understand. So let the big people, let them go through. Like, why do I have to go and deal with these sufferings and these difficulties? So I want to share with you a story, and listen carefully to the story, because if we understand this story, we could answer how to deal with our problems and how to overcome our issues in such an amazing fashion that you will only grow from it. This is a story that Rabbi Eliezer Parkov brings down. There was once a boy. He was in 7th grade. His name is Yehuda. This Yehuda was very smart, very bright. His midot was unbelievable, great manners. Just like overall, like a star kid. Like really, really good. And then his father got sick. And within a short period of time, his father unfortunately passed away. And that's what, like, Yehuda, his pillar of support, his foundation, he just lost it. Now his mother, which was a fresh widow, unable to come to terms with the death of her young husband, her young husband was the breadwinner. He was one that supported the entire family. She didn't even know where to begin. The amount of loans they took out for the medical treatments, and how she's going to go, and now she's going to pay for the mortgage, and how she's going to go and pay for the tuition, and how she's going to put food on the table. There was so much overwhelming her. She didn't know what to do anymore that she just collapsed. She went, and all she could do is open up a Sefer Tehillim and just sit and cry and cry and cry and pray to God. And when she finished with all this prayer, she had no energy, she had no ability, no strength to even go and deal with her dear son, her Yehuda, 7th grader, who lost his father. So he was left dealing with this by himself. And was it difficult. But of course, if things are not dealt with, it affects other areas of life. and his grades started to decline. He started to be more withdrawn. He started not to be as a star kid as he once was. The year passed, and he gets into 8th grade. And at the closing end of the 8th grade, the rabbis of the school now have to figure out where each boy is going to go for high school, because they were in elementary. So they were figuring this boy Yehuda, he was such a bright kid, he has such a bright future, but his marks, his ability to learn for the past year and a half was terrible, because he was dealing with something. But which school is going to go and accept him? So they went, and the rabbi started making phone calls. His rabbi went and called one top yeshiva after another top yeshiva, says, please, can you? And he told them the whole story. And every yeshiva said, every school said, listen, we understand it, but everyone gave a different excuse. It's not going to work for us. We're not really, accommodating to deal with this type of situation. You need to deal with a school that's able to. Everyone gave a great excuse. But so far, this boy had nowhere to go. So the rabbi was thinking and said, you know what? He says, what can I do? I'll have to send him to a second-tier type of a school. But he said, I'm going to give it one more chance. There's a new school opening up. Let me try. Let me try to see what goes on with this school. If it works, good. If this school doesn't work, this is the last resort. We'll have to place him in a lower-tier school. So he calls up this rabbi, and he gives him the whole story. And he thought he was wasting his time. Which new school is going to deal with this problem? New school, you want to build up a strong foundation, a strong, reputation. You start with the top of the line. So this rabbi who's starting this new school said, you know what, let's discuss it like this. He says, I'll meet with this boy. If I see that this boy is willing to go and grow and that I will be able to help him, I'll accept him. But if he's not willing, if he's still very stuck in a situation that he can't get out of it, then I can't help him. So the rabbi on the phone said, that's amazing. Okay, I'll call the boy. We'll be by your house tomorrow night. The next evening, the rabbi drops off this 8th grader, Yehuda, at this rabbi who's opening up a new school. And he brings him in, gives him some food to drink, some food to eat, something to drink. And he goes, and the rabbi starts telling him, and he says, listen, he says, I know your situation. I know it's very difficult what you're going to. He says, I want you to tell me the whole story. Just tell me everything. But one thing that I need you to do is, I want to help you. I want to do something for you, but you need to help me help you. You got to go and you got to work together with me. So the boy felt some sincerity in his eyes, and he went and he told his entire story before this rabbi. And it started off with just tears and crying. And he speaks about his father and how his father learned with him, and his father was his pillar of support, and now he has nothing, and how could he accomplish anything? He has nothing to lean on in his house. And then he goes and he says, he starts explaining of his situation. The rabbi, after hearing his story, felt also tears falling down his cheeks. And he says, listen, he says, from what your rabbis are telling me, he says that you have so much potential. You have so much ability to go, and you're not even using a fraction of it. So he goes and he says, I want to help you. I want to help you, but will you work with me? Will you work together with me? So the rabbi goes, and before he continues, he stops for a second, and he says like a little silent prayer to God, like, please help me say the right things right now. And he goes over to this boy, and he brings him to the window. And he goes over and he shows this boy, there's a building that's being built right across the street. And he shows this boy all the construction crew around, but there's a building still up there. There's a construction crew still all around there. And the rabbi goes to the boy and he says, you see this building over here? And the boy says, yeah. He says, you see, it's a 20-story building. And the boy looks up and he says, yeah, I see, it's really tall. He says, the rabbi goes and says, there's a bunch of contractors that went. They purchased this building, and what they're going to do is they're going to tear this building down, and then they're going to build up a 80-story building. So the rabbi goes and he says, how come, if you think about it, why do they, look at this, it's a good building. There's already 20 stories on it. Why do they need to go and destroy this 20 stories? Let them go and build another 60 stories above these 20 stories, and here, you got yourself a 80-story building. So the rabbi goes and answers this question. He says, this 20-story building, if I go and if we go put another 80 stories on it, it's going to collapse. The foundations are not strong enough to hold 80 stories. They're strong enough to hold 20 stories. So what happens is that these contractors have to go. They have to tear down this entire building and then dig deep down, build strong foundations, and then they can build that 80-story skyscraper. So the rabbi goes over to him and he says, you know, that the same thing happens with a person. When a person, the more you tear down the person, the deeper and deeper that you go, the higher and the sturdier that you can build this foundation. What God did to you is He sent you a burden. He sent you a difficulty. He ripped down your building. But why did He rip down your building? He's ripping it down because there's necessary preparation that you need to go to lay foundations for this tremendous building that God is going to build where you are. And if you go and you use this to build your foundation, you'll be able to build a skyscraper. And then the rabbi goes and says, and how are you going to do this? He says, if you could do mitzvot, and if you do good deeds, and if you're going to go learn, and if you're going to follow what the Torah says, this is the bricks by bricks that's going to build this skyscraper. So Yehuda is sitting over there, this 8th grader is sitting over there, and he says, okay, fine. I understand what you're saying, Rabbi. He says, but why me? Why does my building have to be so tall? He says, why do I have to go through such difficulties in life? Why did I have to lose my father? He says, why can't somebody else have that big skyscraper? Why can't I be like anybody else? With tears falling down his eyes, he's asking the rabbi, but why me? A question that we often ask God, why me? And the rabbi goes and he says, you see that building? He says, why are the contractors going and purchasing this expensive building to tear it down to build? Why don't they just go to the outskirts, let them go somewhere else, and let them go to the desert, and there they could build a skyscraper that has 120 stories for the fraction of the price? Why are they doing it over here? He says, you know why? It's because in this area of land, there's potential. In this area of land, the amount that they're going to bring back in profits are going to be 10 times as if what they do it in the outskirts of the city. Heaven went, the rabbi goes, and gave you such a difficult test because it's a sign that only you have the unique abilities, the potential to build this spiritual building. Now again, we don't ask for tests. But when tests happen to us, we have to realize that God gave us this test because not only we could handle it, but we could go and overcome it and grow from it. And people in life, we go through so many difficulties. Why did I have to be through this family? Why did I have to have this parnasah situation? Why did I have to marry this spouse? Why did I didn't get married? We're always asking these questions of why me, God? Look at everybody else, why me? And you don't want to know why you? Because you have that potential that no one else has. You have the ability to overcome so much, and only you have that. And when this boy, Yehuda, heard how his rabbi was talking to him, he was a changed man. This little boy, Yehuda, became this rabbi's student. He was his talmid. But it was not because of all the Torah that he later learned in his yeshiva and his school. That wasn't the reason. The reason why he became his student is because of that amazing evening that he had with his rabbi. This rabbi changed this kid's life. This kid later became a huge rabbi, a huge talmid chacham, a gadol in the Jewish nation. All from instead of breaking down from a test, he grew from the test. The ability of a person to succeed in dealing with all the difficulties that we didn't deal in our life, what does it depend on? It depends primarily on the way that he looks at them. If you look at it in a negative way, then you know what? You're not going to be able to deal with it. But if you look at it in the proper perspective, then you will be able to use the tools to help that person grow and develop and become a giant of what they can become. We see this when people left the Holocaust. People that left the Holocaust, when you look at the spiritual aspect of it, they went either one or two ways. They just threw religion away, or they went so strong with religion, they came closer to God. And you see the same person that went through the same concentration camp, that went through the same suffering, lost the same amount of people. How is it that one person just broke down and lost everything, another person decided that, you know what, I'm going to build from this. I'm going to grow from this. And they went, and you don't only see this in spirituality, you see this in business also. People that went through the Holocaust and they had the power that other people didn't have because they went through so much in life. It's very interesting. There's some companies that like to hire people that were in the army. Why? Because the army puts you through difficulties. And if you're able to overcome that, you're going to be able to overcome difficulties that throw into you in the business world. There's so many things that happen in our lives that we don't realize that this gives us the ability to grow. And it doesn't have to be huge tests. Even the small things help us grow. Even the small things like getting stuck at home for months or God forbid, hopefully not months, but for weeks on end, not knowing what to do and not knowing how to deal with the family and not knowing how to deal with financial stuff and not knowing how to deal with so many things. There is so much opportunity here that you could go and you could break, or you could go and you can grow. I want to go and from here venture on to a little bit of a different topic. And that is, how come we have that the best people pass away? The greatest. Why does God take the best? There was a story that happened in France that in this particular French city, which is about an hour drive from Paris, there was no kosher mikveh. So when the Jewish families wanted to move to this town, they heard that there was no mikvah for the, they decided that, well, we can't move over here. So they went and they moved somewhere else. So the person by the name of Dov, that he decided that he's going to build a mikvah. And he was good with his hands, he knew how to build. He went and he started researching all the proper, halachot, all the proper laws and how to build a mikvah, and he, raised the money that he was going to build a mikvah. He did everything from A to Z. And where was he going to build a mikvah? He was going to build it right in his backyard to cut down on costs. And he goes and he works diligently, months and months of hard labor, and eventually builds this beautiful mikvah in his own backyard. Now, he had young children, so he always made sure that he would go, and whoever was using it, whoever was dealing with it, they would always make sure to lock the mikvah. And nobody ever went without permission. And then one day, something unthinkable happened. He had a son by the name of Shlomo, which was only 1.5 years old. And somehow, someone forgot to lock the mikvah. And they went, and this boy somehow got into the mikvah, and when the family found him, already floating in the water. And the family was broken. 1.5 years old child, a baby, was taken like this. But even the question was greater, but why was he taken this way? The family gave everything to do this mitzvah, to help other Jews, and the boy is going to die in the situation that they went to help other people? People had so many questions. This is a family that sacrificed so much for other people, so much. And this is their reward? And this is what they get? Dov went and he flew his son's tiny little coffin to Israel, and he buried him on Har HaMenuchot. And then he traveled back to France, where him and his wife and the rest of his family, which they were 10 boys, now there were only 9 boys left. They went and they sat Shiva. A short while after that, after his return from Israel, Dov had a dream. And in this dream, he saw an old man with a long white beard who spoke to him and introduced himself. He says he is one of the Baalei HaTosfos. He's one of the early commentators of the Talmud. And his life was killed al Kiddush Hashem. He died sanctifying God's name. And Dov was having this dream. He was so scared of this dream. It was so vivid, so real. Everything was so legit. He got so scared he jumped up out of bed and he woke up with a sweat. And he was like, I can't believe, he realized it was just a dream. So he falls back, he calms down, he falls back asleep, and the man returns to him. And the man says, listen, you don't have anything to be afraid. He says, the only reason why I came to you is I wanted to explain to you the events that happened in the recent days. He goes on, this old man, and the long white beard, says, I was killed many, many years ago. And I went and I descended up to heaven. And I was brought there to the highest levels. But since, he goes, this old man, and I died, since he died, the highest form of death, he was able to reach such a high level, but there was another level that he couldn't get up to anymore. Why? Because he didn't receive the tahara. The tahara is a proper purification process that after a person dies, they go through this process. And he goes and he says, because he was killed and he was murdered and his body was covered in blood, as well as was during the time of the Crusades, so a regular tahara could not be performed. So they couldn't do a regular tahara. So the court goes and tells him, he says, listen, you're going to get to this level, but if you want to get any higher, you have to come back to this world and get a final immersion in a kosher mikvah. And this old man goes over to this father, Dov, and he says, God knew the sacrifice that you did, that you invested to build this mikvah in your backyard. And that's what makes it so special. And that's why he chose you to be the parents of Shlomo. Because I am that Shlomo. And I came there, to do my last final purification. And then he goes and he says, so that you will know that this dream is true, I will give you a sign. At the end of this year, you will be blessed with a daughter. And sure enough, less than 1 year later, Dov and Esther were blessed with a baby girl. And this story was told. The story is written in many, many sources. And the story in many, many books. The story was retold by somebody who saw the mikvah and met that little girl. So we go and we look at life and we look at the tragedies that we deal with life. We have to realize we don't know. We don't know the full picture. We don't know what's going on, even in a partial picture. And I want to share with you something so amazing, so unbelievable, but you're going to have to stick with me with this. This is something from Rabbi Shimshon Pincus. And Rabbi Shimshon Pincus goes and says something unbelievable. He says, when a tragedy takes place, that means that God's trait of judgment is expressing in the world. And the proper response for us is to arouse ourselves to do tshuva. And if Hashem was so angry with us that he didn't want anything to do with us, then you know what? He wouldn't relate to us. But if he goes and he takes a righteous person from us, then he surely desires something from us. And we see over here that God is taking away precious, pure Jews. That means that clearly he has something that he wants from us. And we have to stop for a second and think, what does God want from us? There's a pasuk in Tehillim, chapter 79, verse 1. that speaks about the defilement of the holy temple. But how does it start? It starts Mizmor le'Asaf, a song to Asaf. The Chazal in Eicha Rabbah goes and questions, why are we singing a song? We're dealing with the destruction of the temple. We're dealing with the defilement of the temple. And we're saying this is a song to God? We should say that this is a mourning. This is something that we should cry. Why is this a song? So this can be compared to a king who built a chuppah for his son. He went and he decorated it and he built it, and then the son went off on its evil ways. And the king, what did the king do? The king immediately took this structure, this edifice that he built for the son, and he went and he destroyed it. He tore the curtains down. He destroyed everything that he built. Meanwhile, there was a servant nearby that saw all this. He started playing a flute and started singing a song. And they went over to him and it says, now you're singing a song? He says, the king just went and destroyed. Why is this something that you're so happy about? Why is this now that you're singing? And this servant goes and says, but if you think about it, he says the king was very angry with his son. It's better that he takes out his anger on the structure of that's just building material, as opposed to taking out his anger on his son. Says Chazal tell us, Mizmor le'Asaf. Why is this a song? Because God destroyed the temple. Why did God destroy the temple? Because the Jewish people were doing something that they shouldn't have done. God got angry at, so to speak, at the Jewish people. So instead of going and pouring his wrath on the Jewish people, God went and he poured his wrath upon sticks and stones. But now ask Reb Shimshon Pikus a very important question. God gets angry? God, if somebody gets angry, right, they take a mug and they throw it against the wall that calms them down, and for whatever, obscure reason, they go and they calm down. But we're talking about God over here. God needs to get angry and then God gets calmed down when he destroys something. How do we understand this? Such an amazing concept is going to blow your mind. Reb Shimshon Pikus goes and says like this. He says that every being is composed of two factors. You have the body and then you have the soul. The soul is what gives life to the body. Now, every soul is connected to the body. A human body has a human soul. An animal body has an animal soul. A human body walks standing up, it fits a soul, which also stands up. An animal body walks on all four with its head towards the ground because that's fitting for the soul, which also comes from the earth. Different levels of soul. We're not going to get into the Kabbalistic aspect of it right now. But what happens, the Kabbalah teaches us, that if the body and the soul do not match, how could that be? One of two reasons. Either a human has an animal soul, or an animal has a human soul. So if a human has an animal soul, so then this human being is going to be very physical, very, like in a gross aspect, very, very physical and very crude. If, says Rabbi Shimshon Pikus, there's something even worse than that, that an animal has a human soul. Well, what happens to a human soul that is connected to an animal body? Now listen to this, it's a little bit Kabbalistic, but bear with me. According to the Torah sources, the soul is termed light, like an O. A body is a receptacle that holds that light. But they need to match each other. If the receptacle and the body match each other, then they will function at full capacity. And it remains intact. However, if the receptacle, which is the body, receives more light than it could handle, than it's built for, then it's not going to be able to hold it and it's going to break. And we see there's something very interesting in Pirkei Avot. In Pirkei Avot, there's something very interesting that we speak about that says that somebody who has deeds, his ma'asim, his actions, are greater than his wisdom, than his learning, then his wisdom remains intact. Meaning that your deeds should be higher than your level of wisdom. But if somebody goes and his wisdom is greater than his deeds, meaning he has a lot of wisdom, but his actions, his level does not compare to that. His wisdom is higher, his deeds are not that great. His deeds are lower, then his wisdom is not going to remain intact. What is this referring to over here? The wisdom is light. The deeds are a person's physical action. So when a person has wisdom that's greater than his deeds, then the receptacle, meaning the light, is greater than the receptacle, then the result, it will break. Let me explain to you like this. Amazing clarity. Reb Chaim Brisker goes and he explains this as follows. Let's say a person has 5 portions of good deeds and 3 portions of wisdom. Meaning that the good deeds should be higher than the wisdom. And the good deeds are higher than the wisdom. So his wisdom is going to remain intact. He will survive in that aspect. But let's say you have another person that has 10 aspects of good deeds and 20 aspects of wisdom. Meaning that his good deeds are 10, which is higher than the first one, which is only 5, but his wisdom is higher to 20. So you're going to ask you a question, who is greater? Is it the person who has more wisdom, because he has 10 aspects of wisdom, and the other person only has 3? Or is it the other way around? Says the Brisker Rav, he says the second person is inferior to the first person. Why? Because the second person has greater wisdom. With greater wisdom comes a greater obligation. And if you fail that obligation, so you fall many times greater than the other person. And we see over this, says Rabbi Shimshon Pincus, in the modern world, that we see over here that the wisdom is greater than the deeds is taken to extreme over here. You see over here, there's at this day and age, the connection between what a person knows and who he is so far apart, it's crazy. We have over here people that could excel in knowledge. It could be a professor, an engineer, an inventor, a doctor, a lawyer. It could be at high intellectual levels. Could figure out how to reach the moon, how to fly, unbelievable stuff. Yet the basic nature remains despicable. The Zohar goes and says that in the 6th millennium, there is going to be great wisdom, great gates of wisdom that's going to open up from heaven and it's going to be coming down. Now, we see over here with these brilliant inventions that we have. Anything from the cell phone, anything to nanotechnology, to medicine, to the ability of flying, to get of satellites. Unbelievable technology we have right now. There's a lot of wisdom. There's so many lights in the world. But what about the receptacles? What about the receptacles? Did people also go up with all this extra wisdom? Did people go higher and higher in their level? Now they're understanding all this wisdom. Are they going to reach higher levels? Unfortunately, we see it the other way around. Rabbi Shimshon Pincus tells of a story when he came to visit a city in America. He didn't say which one, but I think we could all figure out which one it is. And he was amazed by the beauty, the skyscrapers. Everything was at the highest, the best technology. He says it's unbelievable what they built over here. It's so amazing. But then you look at the creatures that are walking around in the street. He says the wisdom and the receptacles, the light and the receptacles, they're not fitting. The technology, the advancement is so high, but we're out of sync with the low and depraved state of the people, unfortunately. What happens when you have wisdom and deeds out of sync? That results in a breakage. Now let's explain this in the factor of the Bet HaMikdash. In the time of the Bet HaMikdash, there was tremendous amount of light. There was tremendous amount of wisdom. There was tremendous amount of Kedusha. But what happened was the Jewish people that lived during those times were not fitting to contain these lights. They damaged their receptacles. They damaged their bodies. They damaged the ability to hold this light through evil deeds. And we know the sins of forbidden relations, idolatry, bloodshed, and even baseless hatred, sinat chinam. They damaged the receptacles. So what happened was the light couldn't fit anymore. They didn't match. And what happens if they didn't match? The receptacles cannot hold the great light. So they nearly broke. They nearly broke. Who's the receptacles? We're the receptacles. We nearly broke. So in other words, the Jewish people almost perished, God forbid. And what did God do in His great mercy? Instead of annihilating the Jewish people, He diminished the light. He lessened the light. He destroyed the Bet HaMikdash, because now that there's no Bet HaMikdash, there's lower lights. If there's lower lights, then all of a sudden, the level that we were able to survive. And this is why you have something very interesting. When it's very common when people are eulogizing somebody, they mention a verse from Shir HaShirim. It's chapter 6, verse 2. It's Dodi Yarad Leganot, speaking about God, Dodi God. He went down to his garden. And what did he do? V'lilkot shoshanim. He went to gather roses. What's the roses? He went to gather the righteous people, meaning that God went and He took away the righteous people among the Jewish nation. And this is not just a mashal. This is really how it happens. God really takes away the best from among us. Why? To save the Jewish people. There are exceedingly righteous people among us. There's exceedingly tzaddikim. Amazing. But what happens is, if there's such a high level of light, there's a demand so much for the people. If we have such high-level righteous people, then we have to have that ability to hold that light, to hold that wisdom. The death of tzaddikim, explains Rabbi Shimshon Pincus, is like the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. What God is doing is God is diminishing the light to save the receptacles. We hear always of people that are going and are passing away, and it's a kapara for the entire nation. We hear that, but here's how you understand it. So amazing, so beautiful how Rabbi Shimshon Pincus goes and explains it. And Rabbi Shimshon Pincus goes on and says, you have, the people, they want to have leaders like who? The Chavetz Chaim. They want to deal with rabbis of the highest level. They want to have, who's their rabbi? The biggest rabbi of the generation. They want to be in the top of the top, but yet they don't live their lives that should be appropriate to have that type of rabbi. We want the Chavetz Chaim to be our rabbi, but at the same point in time, we live our lives the way that we live our lives. Says Rabbi Shimshon Pincus, you know what would happen if Chavetz Chaim would live in our generation? One of two things. Either he will elevate us all, or he will destroy us all. Because there's a level of light that comes in, and something has got to give when the receptacles is not fitting the light. Either the receptacles expand and grow and get closer to God to fill that light, or the light goes and diminishes to be able to fit into the receptacles. What we need to work on today and during these days is we need to make our deeds, our receptacles fitting to be a character of a Jew. And we look at it in our generation, you know, this unbelievable amount of Torah learning. And this is what Rabbi Shimshon Pincus says. He says there's a lot of yeshivas and there's a lot of learning, Baruch Hashem, for Torah in any time, and Baruch Hashem for so many organizations, so unbelievable of what they do and how they spread Torah. But the question, says Rabbi Shimshon Pincus, that we have to ask is our deeds equal to our levels of wisdom? Is our light equal to our receptacles? How do we live our life? How do we eat? How do we pray to God? How do we recite blessings? You know, you have so many people that are they know so much Torah, but how do they act at home? Do they scream at their family members? Do they abuse the family members? Do they get angry at home? What about business? Are they honest in business? What about dress? Do they dress like a religious person? They know all the knowledge. They know what they need to do, but do they act like that? Do they keep Shabbat the way that it's supposed to? Do they guard their eyes the way that it's supposed to? What we need to do is we need to concentrate and think, how are we going to go and expand our receptacles? And what happens if we expand our receptacles? Then God could send us some more light. But I'll tell you something amazing, something fascinating, that it could actually go and prolong your life. There was once a secular Jewish boy that was in the Israeli army. And once he finished the army, he was very, very intelligent. You know, he had success for his future. And after he finished the army, you know, he was figuring out what to do, and he felt unsettled. He felt, you know, sort of a lack of fulfillment in his life. And somehow, from a secular family, secular life, he ended up in Bnei Brak, in Yeshiva Nesivos Olam. He ended up learning in this yeshiva, and he made tremendous strides in his learning. Within a short period of time, he grew to he focused so much, he worked so hard in his learning, that he went from a secular boy to one of the highest boys in the yeshiva, in the learning-wise. And then suddenly, out of the blue, he fell ill. He had a cancerous growth. And unfortunately, a few months later, he passed away. And there was a rabbi that was going to go and was going to give a eulogy, give a hesped by his funeral. And this rabbi's name was Rabbi Yehoshua Mishavsky. And he went and he decided, how is he going to speak to a family that's secular? They lost a boy. Like, what is he going to tell them? He decided he's going to go and consult with Reb Chaim Kanievsky. And he goes to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and the Reb Chaim Kanievsky goes and instructs him as follows. I'm going to quote to you what Reb Chaim Kanievsky said. Reb Chaim Kanievsky goes and says, this boy was surely destined to die at a younger age. But God saw deep inside his heart that he had a tiny seedling, a tiny aspect of tshuva that were beginning to blossom inside. He therefore bestowed upon him an additional years of life as a gift. And in this period of time, this boy became a Baal Tshuva, became a Talmid Chacham, and he merited to die as a Ben Torah after his soul was purified with sufferings of Yisurim that he went through. Reb Chaim Kanievsky goes and finishes. This is exactly what you should say at the Levaya. Now, you know, Rabbi Mishkovsky is going to be like, okay, fine, like, I believe the rabbi, of course. You know, the rabbi saying, I believe. But how am I going to go and say this in a secular family? You know, it's unbelievable. But he was thinking, he says, you know what? The Gadol of the generation, the biggest rabbi told me to say this, I'm going to say this. He gets up and he repeats exactly what the rabbi told him to say at the funeral. And after he finished speaking, after the funeral started dispersing, another rabbi, which was present at this funeral, his name was Rabbi Noah Hertz, he grabbed Rabbi Mishkovsky's arm and he says, come, let me bring you to the Father. Let me introduce you to the Father. And he's like, and before you know it, he's in front of the Father. And the Father was so overwhelmed with emotions at that time. And the Rabbi Mishkovsky thought, who knows what he's going to throw at me right now, saying that his son was supposed to die earlier and all that. The rabbi, the secular father, goes over to him and he says words that blew him away. He says, you don't know how right you are. He goes and he started waving his finger at the rabbi. He said, several years ago, my son was in the army and he was assigned to enter Lebanon. And he was assigned to enter in a certain tank with other soldiers. And then suddenly, the commander approached him and started screaming at him, who told you to get into this tank? You're not supposed to be here, you're supposed to be in a different tank. And he pulled him out of this tank and he put him out to a different tank for no reason. That was his group, that was his tank. He doesn't know why he did it. But he had to follow his superior officer and he went outside. He said, as soon as that tank started its journey, there was a shell that exploded in and everybody in that tank died. And the father, with tears in his eyes, is saying, he's like, you're 100% correct. There's so many hidden things that we don't know. But what caused, says Reb Chaim Kanievsky, what caused this prolong of life, the ability to go and say, you know what, I'm going to change myself. we're living in a situation right now that's very difficult. And everybody's very scared of what will be. You want a skula, you want something that will, what can prolong your life, take upon yourself something, do tshuva. He had, what prolonged this life? Just a thought process of tshuva. Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky said, gave this boy a gift of additional years. There was a 19-year-old girl who took, unfortunately, ill, and 3.5 months later, she passed away. And the family, dealing with a loss of such a young person, the family had a very hard time dealing with it. And the sister had a dream. And, the family was like, okay, fine, dreams. They weren't into dreams, but the dreams was like so legit. They went and they decided they're going to ask Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky about this dream, if it was real or not. Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky goes and he says, yes, this is a real dream and it should be publicized. So the sister told the following about her dream. She saw herself in a large garden. It was beautiful flowers and trees, and everybody was singing praise to God. And then she saw multiple of people that were all dressed in white. They were learning Torah on like golden chairs. And then she said she saw a rabbi who was giving a class. And so the rabbi had a face of a young man, but like with a long white beard, like an old man. And after they finished, the class was finished, this rabbi goes over to the sister and says, come, I want to take you to your sister who passed away. And they went and they entered a different garden. And this sister saw her sister that passed away, and she saw her face was like just like shining with joy. And the sister ran over to the sister that passed away and says, tell us, why did you leave us at such a young age? So the sister replied, he said, you should know that I already lived before in this world. And I lived during the time of the Holocaust. And when I was a little baby, I was given to a non-Jewish family to be raised. And I was raised as a non-Jew until 19 and a half. When I discovered that I was Jewish, from then on I lived as a Jew. And I ended up marrying a great rabbi and lived a very, very spiritual life. And in Gan Eden, in heaven, they went and I kept on going higher and higher until I was stopped. And they said, listen, you got to a very, very high level, but there were certain years that you didn't live as a Jew. And she goes and she says, I was given permission to come back and fix those 19 and a half years that I didn't live as a Jew. And that's all I needed to do. I came down here and I completed my mission. That's all I needed to do. And then she goes on and says something amazing. She goes on and then she says, I want you to please to thank everybody for coming to my funeral. It was such a great merit, that's a great zchut for me. And then she goes and she says, please ask people to do mitzvot for me so I could rise even higher. And she goes on and she says, when a person does a mitzvah, a good deed or learning, le'ilu neshama, to go to help a deceased, then she goes, the sister who passed away goes and she says, we gain and you don't lose. He says, you'll get the same credit. And then she goes on. Some secrets that she revealed. She goes on and says, if people here would know in this world the value of Torah mitzvot, we will be running all day to do it. And then she goes on, she says, in this realm, you have questions, why did I leave? In this realm, in this place where I am right now, there are no questions. There's nothing, everything makes perfect sense. And then she goes and she finishes off with saying, she goes and she says, please tell our aunt. This is the deceased person telling her. It says, she keeps sending me flowers every time she teaches a class in her seminary and does it le'ilu neshama for my soul. And then she finished her, her description, her discussion with her sister. Then the sister said, she asked her, the sister said, but tell me, says, we recently had a cousin's wedding. Were you by the wedding that we just had? And the deceased sister said, yes, I was there and I was dancing. There's so much in life that we can't see. But we have to know that God knows what He's doing. The world is very, very organized. Everything is very meticulously looked over, and everything is planned out and done according to the T of God's plans and God's preparations. I want to finish off with a very important concept from the Bnei Yissaschar. The Bnei Yissaschar goes, and he sent a letter to his Hasidim in Munkach after the cholera epidemic in 1831. And he goes and he says, this epidemic came for our benefit, and it draws our redemption closer. And even if we are not worthy of the redemption of the Geulah, you should know that the suffering of the epidemic certainly reduces several years from the difficult decree of our exile. And a believing Jew has to understand that everything is good, and we have to work hard to be able to accept it with joy. And we have to, if we could go and plug in what the Bnei Yissaschar said to this, that we don't know when the redemption is going to come. But one thing we know for sure is the suffering that we're dealing today is definitely bringing the decree of our exile closer to an end that we could see with Mashiach. When we go, we have to understand, we have to think about what's going on over here. So we discussed a few concepts that we have to just do a quick, a quick recap. When someone goes and passes away, people tend to blame themselves. If you did something wrong, then maybe you have to do tshuva, but you're not the cause of that person's death. That person was supposed to die during that time. And the way that the Torah views death, we said, how does the Torah view death? The Torah views death, it's temporary. At one point, we're all going to be reunited. Death is only a stage that gets us to the next place. The soul never dies. The soul always goes on. But what about the family that deals with such hardships, the people that deal with such tests? And one thing we have to realize, as hard as it is, we don't ask for tests, and we don't want tests. But if tests come to us, we have to realize that God gave us these difficulties because we can handle it. Not only can we handle it, but we could grow from it. So all the difficulties that each and every single one of us are going through today, and in the future, and even in the past, we have to think about it. Now, how do we break from it? But how do we grow from this? How do we go and build not only a beautiful house, let's build a skyscraper of our life. Let's succeed from our troubles. Let's grow from the difficulties in our life. Now we'll open it up to some questions. What if somebody is cremated? Cremated is a very, very big problem in halakha for many, many different reasons. One of the situations with cremation is that a person is supposed to, the decomposition of the body is part of the tikkun for the soul. So a person, when a body is placed in the ground, the decomposition actually helps. It's painful for the body, but it helps the soul. There's another aspect which regards to triyat hamitim, and there's another aspect that is supposed to go into the ground. So cremation is a very, very big problem, and it's obviously it's not allowed by any means necessary. And unfortunately there was a story, maybe it was in South America, where there was a Jew that the government, because of coronavirus, the government went and decided that anybody else coronavirus has to be going cremated. And the Jews tried to do something, and they, it didn't, for some reason, whatever, it didn't work out, and this person was cremated. If it was beyond the abilities of a person to do, there's unfortunately cremation also happened in the Holocaust. So what we need to do according to halakha is we're not allowed to have cremation regardless of the circumstances. A person has to go and return to the ground for numerous reasons. My brother is a convert, his biological non-Jewish father died, what happens to his soul? So anybody that's a non-Jew, the soul goes to the level of non-Jews. There is, non-Jews do have a share in heaven. There is a place to heaven. It's a lower place, but they are able to go into heaven if they kept the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. Okay. The next question is, how can we know what balance to set between being busy with Torah and mitzvot all day versus enjoying life, such as playing sports, going on trips, pleasure activities, and so on and so forth? So this is an excellent question on where do we know how to balance it. So in many situations, it's really you have to speak to your rabbi and say, listen, so what am I supposed to do? But I'll tell you one thing as a very, very important factor that's very important for Baal Tshuva. So if everybody's a Baal Tshuva, and everybody should be a Baal Tshuva, has to listen to this. There are many times when somebody becomes religious, or more religious, we'll talk about in the family. So then there comes some friction in the family. Like the person is religious, and then the family is more secular. And it becomes like, okay, now this person is a fanatic, and now there's separation. There's all different fights that could happen from it. When a person becomes religious, when a person starts following the Torah, what they need to do is that should be changing themselves and their character traits. That should be changing how they think, how they act, how they speak to their parents. It should change everything. Becoming religious is not just sitting and keeping Shabbat and keeping kosher. Becoming religious means that you change who you are. You become better. The Vilna Gaon says that one of the purposes that we are in this world is to go and become better people, change our character traits. So if somebody becomes religious and is still angry, that person is not fully religious yet. The person has to go and work on their anger. The person has to go and work on their relationship. So what happens is that if you really go and you really come closer to God, that means that you're becoming a better person. When you're becoming a better person, this is where the wisdom is going to go, and it's going to filter all, trickle down to all your actions. So you sat here and you learned for like an hour tonight, and you have this information that we learned tonight, Baruch Hashem. So now what are you going to do with that information? Is it going to trickle down for you to go and become a better person? Or is it going to stay over there as wisdom, be like, nice class, maybe it was entertaining, and we'll go on with life? So when you go and you deal with the wisdom, it has to trickle down to your actions. And that action goes on everything. It goes on how you play sports, and it goes on how you deal with your parents. It goes on how you interact with your friends. It goes on how you deal with your rabbi. It goes on everything, how you do business. Everything goes with that together. At the same point in time, people need to go and relax, and people need to go, yeah, that has to dealt with the rabbi, and how much and how much. There's one person that learns for an hour a week, and then the rest of the week they have to relax, you know? So they're nonstop, who knows what they're doing. They're watching movies for a week straight, and 1 week, okay, fine, they'll watch a class. Obviously, the balance is incorrect. So every situation has to be dealt with on a personal, with the rabbi. Okay, next question. What about a Jew who just found out that he or she is a Jew, barely got to live as one, and was forced to live in an idolatry environment, but can he still have a share in the world to come? Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's say somebody was born and raised in a secular environment, or sometimes even in a Catholic environment, or even in any other type of environment. When they find out that they're Jewish, they could absolutely have, share in the world to come. They have to follow Torah. They have to do the tshuva. And with this tshuva, also, you have to remember, it comes with personality change, with personality growth. And with that, people always wonder, like, how am I going to go and do kiruv on my family? How am I going to go do that? You want to know the best way to do it? Is lead by example. I know personal people that became religious. Why? Because their spouse became religious, and the spouse became a better person. And they didn't need lectures and proof that there's a God, that there's Torah. You want to know why they changed? They changed because their husband started being nicer to them. They changed because their wife started treating them with more respect. They changed to be like, well, if this is what religion does, and by the way, this tactic takes a while sometimes. If they go and they say, if this is what religion does, then I want to have a part of that. They see that the spouse is happier. They see religion has to take an effect inside of you, has to change who you are. Okay, there's no, one more question. Greetings from Panama. Whew, welcome. Things all around the world are not getting better for Am Yisrael. Is this a clear sign for making an aliyah? Or which good reasons do we have for remaining in our current countries? This is an excellent question. What are we supposed to do in regards to our staying in our foreign countries, or should we go and move to Israel? So there are some rabbis that have been coming out for quite some time in the public and saying that everybody should move to Israel and everybody should go, and if you're able to go and move over there. At the same point in time, so yes, the best thing is if you can go to Israel, if you have the ability to go to Israel. And again, before you make that type of drastic decision, you have to go and speak to your rabbi for guidance, because sometimes it's very, very difficult, and it could backfire if you go in the wrong time, or if you're not, able to. Especially when you're dealing with children in schools, there's a lot of angles that one has to deal with it. So if you're able to go to Eretz Yisrael, then of course you should go. If you're not sure, if you have a business here, if your family is over here, if the kids are doing great in school, if you're going and you're a rabbi in the community, if you're doing kiruv, and there's so many ifs, ands, and buts that goes on over here, that maybe it's more beneficial for you to stay here right now. But again, that's something that has to be dealt on a case-by-case basis. But ultimately speaking, yes, if you're able to move to Israel, by all means, you should. We all should. Okay, looks like that was the final question. And with that, we will end. Okay.